When we usually visualize human progress, we kind of tend to rely on this very specific, very comforting mental image.
Oh, yeah. The classic upward trajectory.
Exactly. We picture this grand, sweeping staircase. Like we start down in the caves, we figure out how to, spark a fire, we invent the wheel, and we just keep climbing relentlessly upward towards skyscrapers and silicon chips and orbital space stations.
Right, right. It is the ultimate linear narrative.
Mm,
I mean, it's triumphant, it's inevitable, and frankly, it is the story we are all taught from the very moment we enter a classroom.
totally.
The underlying assumption is always, always that modern humanity is the apex of this long upward climb.
But I want you to look a little closer at that metaphorical staircase today. What if, instead of, solid stone, it's actually more like a massive game of Jenga?
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Right, because what if every single step up over the last 10 millennia was achieved by basically compromising the structural foundation of the entire tower?
Yeah, and that tension is the absolute core of what we are unpacking today. We are asking a terrifyingly simple question. What if the very foundation of Western progress is actually just a highly sophisticated blueprint for self-destruction?
Wow. Yeah, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Our mission today is to explore a truly radical proposal for human survival. We are diving into a concept known as re-indigenization.
It's a huge topic.
It really is, and our roadmap for this is a fiercely thought-provoking 2020 article from counterpunch.org, and it was written by the scholar J.P. Linstroth.
Who's a fascinating guy, by the way.
Absolutely. Just to give you some context on the mind behind the source material here, Linstroth is a heavily respected academic. He's the author of Epochal Reckonings, which is this poetic guide to our 21st century crises.
Right.
And that work actually took home the co-winner title for the 2020 Proverse Prize.
Yeah, so it is a heavy-hitting piece from a recognized thinker, and it really demands that we completely dismantle and, reevaluate how we conceptualize our daily existence on this planet.
Definitely. But before we jump in, I need to make something explicitly clear to you listening.
Yeah, important disclaimer time.
Right. This source material contains some very sharp foundational critiques of Western civilization, of modern capitalism, and of our current global environmental policies.
Sure, critiques.
Yes. So our goal on this deep dive is to impartially unpack Linstroth's arguments and, the perspectives of the indigenous leaders he quotes. We aren't here to endorse these viewpoints or plant a political flag on either side.
Exactly. We're just the messengers here.
Right. Our job is simply to act as your guides, basically helping you grasp the mechanics of the really profound and challenging ideas contained in this original text.
Yeah, because to do justice to an alternative framework of this magnitude, we have to examine the architecture of the arguments objectively, right? Like, without bringing our own defensive biases into the room.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand why Linstroth believes society desperately needs to be, quote-unquote, re-indigenized, we have to sort of skip the basic history lessons.
Right.
You already know that the Neolithic Revolution, the dawn of agriculture, roughly 10 to 15,000 years ago, kind of changed everything.
We stopped moving and started farming.
Exactly. But Linstroth isn't just giving us a standard agricultural history lesson here. He is pointing to a massive psychological fracture.
Yeah, a massive shift in how we see ourselves.
Think of human history like a 300-page book, okay? For roughly 290,000 years, which is basically most of the book human beings just adapted to their environments. They lived sustainably as hunter-gatherers.
Almost the whole book.
Right. But then, in the very last sentence, on the very last page, that last 10,000-year sprint, we decided to force the environment to adapt to us.
And the consequences of that psychological pivot are just staggering. I mean, when we started domesticating plants and animals, we ushered in what we now broadly categorize as civilization.
Which sounds great on paper.
Right, brought writing, complex state systems, technological acceleration.
Yeah.
But Linstroth forces us to examine the mechanics of the shadow side of that era, because civilization required the concept of surplus, and surplus required defense.
Which changes everything.
Completely. That mechanically brought us entrenched hierarchies, endemic warfare, the whole concept of land ownership, slavery, and irreversible environmental extraction.
Wow.
Yeah, the shift wasn't just about, planting wheat. It was about shifting our identity from participants in an ecosystem to masters of an inventory.
Masters of an inventory. It's so easy to blame early farming, but the underlying mindset is what Linstroth is really targeting here. Like, why did this destructive inventory management mindset becomes so deeply calcified in modern society.
Well, that leads us directly to his critique of Western philosophy.
And here's where I have to push back a little on the source material, to be honest.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, blaming modern climate crises on a 17th century French philosopher feels like a massive leap. Like, how does René Descartes actually factor into a multinational corporation clear-cutting a forest today?
What's fascinating here is how abstract philosophical ideas actually function as like the unseen operating system of our culture.
Okay.
So Linstroth zeroes in on a concept known as Cartesian dualism. Descartes is famous for his 1641 work, Meditation 6.
Right.
In it, he mathematically and abstractly separates the mind from the corporeal body. He essentially posits that the mind, with its capacity for abstract reason, is an entirely distinct entity from our physical, fleshy selves.
So wait, Descartes just sits in his room by the fire in 1641, decides his mind is this elevated, ethereal thing completely separate from his dirt-bound body.
Yep.
And somehow, 400 years later, that exact thought process is the legal and moral justification for bulldozing a rainforest. I mean, that has to be the most destructive bit of armchair philosophizing in human history.
I mean, when you lay it out like that, the absurdity is stark, but the mechanism is incredibly powerful. Linstroth deduces that if you can conceptually divide the human mind from the human body, it is only a millimeter of a logical step to divide humanity entirely from nature.
Oh, wow. I see.
Yet nature ceases to be the context in which we exist. It becomes this separate, unthinking, unfeeling backdrop. It literally just becomes a stage where the human mind acts out its brilliance.
Right. So if my mind is this elevated thing, I am no longer an animal in an ecosystem. I am a detached observer.
Exactly.
But Linstroth doesn't let Descartes take all the blame, does he?
No, he doesn't.
Because he points out that this intellectual wedge has even older roots. He quotes the Old Testament, specifically Isaiah's 45.10, which describes God creating the earth specifically to be inhabited by humans.
Yes.
And this isn't just a historical footnote, it cements the idea of dominion. It tells us that the world is centered entirely around us.
Theological dominion and Cartesian dualism essentially merge to create the ultimate extraction-based worldview.
It's the perfect storm.
It really is. The philosophical root of our environmental disconnection is this deeply ingrained, completely normalized hubris that the earth was made exclusively for human use.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if this intellectual disease is the separation of mind and body, what is the cure?
Right. How do we fix it?
Well, Linstroth looks to modern science to completely dismantle this 400-year-old framework. Like when you look at biology, neurology, primatology, our basic evolutionary knowledge definitively proves that we are animal.
We absolutely are.
So the narrative that separates humankind from nature is not just philosophically problematic, it is biologically false.
Well, yeah, Descartes didn't have the benefit of modern functional MRIs or primatology, right?
Very true.
So to explain the actual mechanics of how deeply intertwined we are, Linstroth brings in the work of anthropologist Maurice Bloch. Specifically, his 2013 work, In and Out of Each Other's Bodies.
That title alone does heavy lifting to break down the rigid boundaries of the Cartesian self.
It's a great title.
But how does Bloch actually prove we aren't separate? Like, what's the evidence?
So Bloch introduces a framework that explains human interaction without ever separating mind and body. He essentially divides our social existence into two interconnected layers.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is the transactional social. This is the continuous, subconscious flow of mutual monitoring between people.
Mutual monitoring.
Yeah, think about how humans naturally synchronize their movements in a crowded space, or how our stress hormones actually spike when we perceive subtle anxiety in someone else's facial expressions.
Oh, right, like catching a mood.
Exactly. It is deeply instinctual, biologically hardwired behavior aimed at group survival.
So it is the biological reality of our connection. We aren't just thinking about each other. Our nervous systems are actively responding to each other in real time.
Building on that, Bloch introduces the transcendental social.
Okay, transcendental social.
Right. This is the conscious, explicit representation of our society. These are the second-order phenomena we actively create, like the legal contracts, the religious rituals, the formal institutions.
Now, the pushback here would be that the transcendental layer, the laws and institutions, is exactly what separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom. That is pure Cartesian mind at work.
Which is exactly the trap Linstroth warns against.
Oh, really?
Yes. The core takeaway from Bloch's anthropology is that you cannot separate the transactional from the transcendental. There is no hard line where the biological animal ends and the cultural human begins.
Huh.
The laws we write and the rituals we perform are entirely built upon and influenced by our biological wiring for mutual connection.
That makes a lot of sense.
Therefore, separating mind from body or culture from nature is a profound misunderstanding of how human beings actually function. We are a seamless part of the biological whole.
Abstract philosophy and anthropological frameworks are fascinating, but I look at this and my immediate pragmatic reaction is to ask,
How does this fix things?
exactly, how does understanding our biological interconnectedness solve concrete issues like global poverty, starvation, or, I don't know, a collapsing power grid? We need to move from theory to application.
Right. People want solutions.
And Linstroth actually anticipates this skepticism. He provides a 10-point roadmap for what re-indigenization actually looks like in practice.
Which is crucial.
And we really need to clarify his terminology here. He is not suggesting 8 billion people suddenly abandon cities and adopt a historical hunter-gatherer lifestyle.
No, that would be a catastrophic misreading of his thesis. Re-indigenization is a psychological and systemic paradigm shift.
Right.
It means reimagining our humanity and basically moving beyond the deeply flawed idea of treating the planet as a limitless vending machine for technological progress.
So let's walk through the mechanics of his roadmap. He argues we must accept the Gaia theory, which is the concept that Earth is a living being in its own right. I have to admit, to a lot of listeners, Gaia theory might sound a bit, woo-woo. It sounds like a metaphor rather than a policy directive. How does viewing the Earth as a living entity actively alter the drafting of environmental policy?
Well, it changes the fundamental baseline of international law.
How so?
Think about it. If the Earth is viewed purely as a resource, environmental policy is just about resource management and calculating acceptable extraction rates.
Right, just doing the math on what we can take.
Exactly. But if you adopt the framework that the Earth is a living system, as indigenous peoples historically always have, then the Earth theoretically has rights.
Oh, wow.
It changes the legal framework from how much can we take to what is our duty of care to prevent harm. You shift from being an owner managing an inventory to a guardian protecting a living system.
That shift dictates massive practical action then.
Huge action.
Like, his fourth point argues for a massive reallocation of global resources. Instead of pouring vast fortunes into systemic warfare and the military-industrial complex, those resources must be redirected into renewable energies, sustainable farming, and actually solving malnutrition.
Right.
We have to stop treating farming as factory production that just results in endless soil depletion.
And he heavily emphasizes the legal frameworks required to enforce all this.
Yeah, let's talk about the laws.
So points 5, 6, and 7 focus on elevating indigenous voices on the global stage. He argues they need a formalized, powerful voice with first world nations in UN forums, specifically citing the 2015 Paris Agreement.
Okay.
And he highlights the absolute necessity of adhering to international treaties like the ILO Convention Number 169 from 1989 and the 2007 UNDRP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
My cynical reaction to this is that the UN is notorious for passing incredibly eloquent, entirely toothless declarations.
Fair point.
Like, if Linstroth is relying on UNDRP to save us, how does he suggest we actually enforce it against multinational corporations who have massive financial incentives to just ignore it?
The mechanism of enforcement lies in a legal concept embedded in these documents called free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC.
FPIC.
Yeah. When nations actually ratify frameworks like ILO 169 or adopt UNDRIP into their domestic laws, FPIC ceases to be a polite suggestion and becomes a hard legal barrier.
Meaning what, practically?
It means a corporation cannot legally begin a mining or oil extraction project without the explicit, uncoerced agreement of the indigenous populations whose lands are affected. Linstroth is arguing that these legal barriers must be radically strengthened and universally enforced to protect the remaining ancient ecosystems.
And the urgency behind enforcing these legal barriers is existentially real. Linstroth points out that scientists widely agree we are currently entering the 6th extinction phase on this planet.
It's terrifying.
It is. His final point is that to prevent total ecological collapse, we must allow indigenous peoples to act as planetary ambassadors to help guide this global shift.
And as vital as concepts like free, prior, and informed consent are, discussing international law can feel incredibly dry and bureaucratic.
Very true.
Reading a UN declaration from an office building doesn't capture the visceral reality of what is actually happening on the ground.
No, it strips the blood and the ash out of this situation.
It really does.
That is why Linstroth anchors his academic arguments with a deeply powerful open letter. It was published in The Guardian in October 2020, and it was written by Namonte Nkemo.
Such a powerful letter.
She is the first female president of the Waorani Organization of the Pastaza Province and co-founder of the Cibo Alliance in Ecuador. Her words bring this entire philosophical discussion crashing violently into our current reality.
Yeah, her letter is addressed directly to the presidents of the 9 Amazonian countries and to world leaders at large. And it basically serves as a breathtaking, real-time indictment of that 10,000-year march of progress we discussed at the top of the show.
I want to detail exactly what she is fighting against here, because the atrocities she lists are specific, and they are happening as you listen to this.
Yeah.
She describes her home, the Amazon rainforest, raging with unnatural fires. She calls out corporations for continuously spilling oil into their rivers. She points to the miners who have been stealing gold for 500 years, leaving behind these open pits and deadly toxins.
It's devastating.
And she condemns the land grabbers clear-cutting ancient primary forests just so cattle can graze and monocrop plantations can grow. Essentially, as she puts it, quote, so the white man can eat.
Yeah.
And she highlights the devastating reality that their elders, who are basically the living libraries of their generational knowledge, were dying from coronavirus, while outsiders were busy planning how to further parcel up their lands to stimulate an economy that has never once benefited her people.
It's heartbreaking. And if we connect her lived experience to the broader theories we've been unpacking today, the philosophical core of her letter rests on a single word from her language, Wodededo.
Which word is that?
That word is Kowori. Historically, she explains, it simply meant the outsider or the stranger. It didn't inherently carry a negative connotation.
But the outside world changed the definition of the word through centuries of action, right?
Yes. The evolution of that word is a profound tragedy. For her people, Kowori has come to represent, quote, the white man that knows too little for the power that he wields and the damage that he causes.
Wow. That's heavy.
It is an incredible, haunting distillation of the ultimate danger of Cartesian dualism. Because when you philosophically separate yourself from nature, you remain entirely ignorant of its complexities.
And Nkemo lays out the horrific mechanism of that ignorance perfectly. If you believe you are separate from a forest, you don't understand it.
Right.
If you don't understand it, it has no intrinsic value to you beyond what you can extract from it. And if it has no value to you, it is incredibly easy to destroy.
As she writes, that arrogant ignorance makes it easy to destroy things guiltlessly, remorselessly, foolishly, even righteously.
Righteously. That's the scariest part.
Exactly. That is exactly what is happening to their territories and to the entire planet's climate. The philosophical separation we invented basically creates the moral loophole for guiltless destruction.
So what does this all mean for you and me? When you pull all these threads together, from Descartes' fireside musings to the anthropology of our nervous systems, to a 10-point legal roadmap, to the literal burning of the Amazon Linstroth, is asking modern society to do something that feels almost impossible.
It's a massive ask.
He is asking us to completely abandon a 10,000-year-old illusion, the illusion that we are dominant over nature, that our minds are separate from the dirt we walk on, and that human progress requires endless extraction.
Yeah.
Instead, we are being urged to embrace an indigenous understanding of our world, a framework of interconnected guardianship where the biological and the social are one, and where we recognize that we are utterly dependent on the earth, not the landlords of it.
It's a profound shift. And as we wrap up this analysis, I want to leave you with a different way to look at the future, building on everything we've discussed today.
Okay, what is it?
Well, we've established that our current technological world was built on a foundation of separation, the idea that we must conquer nature to innovate. But imagine for a moment what kind of world we could engineer if we applied our immense technological brilliance through a lens of indigenous guardianship.
Oh, wow.
Like if we stop using technology to extract and start using it to harmonize, what does a re-indigenized Silicon Valley actually look like? What kind of unimaginable progress could we achieve if innovation was driven by deep connection rather than profound separation?
That is a phenomenal question to end on. I mean, it completely shifts the narrative from mourning what we've broken to imagining what we could actually build if we just changed the blueprint.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the foundations of the world around you. Keep looking for those deeper connections, and we will catch you next time.